My name is Matthew, I'm 34 years old, and I thought I'd finally found the perfect gift for my parents' 40th anniversary. A luxury European vacation. 3 cities, 7 days, all expenses paid. I spent months planning every detail. When I pulled into their driveway that morning, luggage in my trunk, my heart was full of excitement. Then my mother spoke those words. Your sister needed some rest, so we decided to take her instead. My stomach dropped as Jessica smirked behind them. I drove away in silence, but they had no idea what awaited them in Europe. If you're watching this story, drop a comment letting me know where you're viewing from. Hit subscribe and stay with me to see how this family betrayal unfolded. I grew up in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of Chicago. Our house was small but comfortable, the kind where love made up for what we lacked in square footage. My parents, Robert and Diana, worked themselves to the bone to provide for Jessica and me. Dad pulled double shifts at the manufacturing plant while Mom balanced her nursing job with keeping our household running. Vacations were rare luxuries, usually limited to weekend trips to Wisconsin or the occasional drive to Michigan's lake shores. Despite our limited means, my parents prioritized education above all else. They started college funds for us when we were born, adding whatever they could spare each month. Sometimes that meant Dad skipped lunch, or Mom mended clothes instead of buying new ones. I noticed these sacrifices even as a child, and they shaped my view of money and success. I was always the practical one, working part-time jobs throughout high school, saving for books and helping with household expenses when I could. My approach to life was straightforward. Work hard, save diligently, build something meaningful. Jessica was different. 3 years younger than me, she approached life with an expectation that things would simply work out. While I was delivering newspapers at 5 in the morning, she was sleeping in. When I was studying for scholarships, she was at parties. Our different approaches to life created a clear divide in our trajectories. I graduated with honors, earned a computer science degree, and immediately secured a position at a tech startup. The hours were brutal, but the experience was invaluable. I lived frugally, sharing an apartment with 2 roommates, bringing lunch from home and investing whatever I could. Jessica bounced between majors before settling on communications, took 6 years to graduate, and then drifted between entry-level jobs, never staying anywhere longer than 8 months. The pattern continued into our 20s. I climbed the corporate ladder, eventually taking a risk to found a software company specializing in healthcare applications. Jessica cycled through careers: retail management, real estate assistant, social media coordinator, personal trainer. Each new job began with enthusiasm that quickly faded into complaints, conflicts with management, or sudden desires to find her true calling. Throughout these years, our parents remained Jessica's safety net. When she couldn't make rent, they covered it. When she quit a job without having another lined up, they supplemented her unemployment. When her car needed repairs, Dad wrote the check. I watched this cycle repeat itself while building my own security, saying little but observing much. 3 years ago, my company received significant venture capital funding, transforming my paper wealth into actual financial freedom. The timing coincided with Jessica's latest career collapse. She'd invested in an online boutique that failed within 6 months, leaving her with inventory nobody wanted and credit card debt exceeding $30,000. Once again, our parents prepared to rescue her, discussing a second mortgage on their home to cover her debts. That was my breaking point. I intervened, paying off Jessica's debt myself on the condition she work with a career counselor and financial advisor I would hire. She agreed, initially attended 3 sessions, then stopped showing up, claiming the professionals didn't understand her creative spirit. My parents defended her decision, suggesting I was trying to mold her into something she wasn't. Despite this frustration, my relationship with my parents remained close. We spoke weekly, and I visited monthly. During one such visit last year, Mom mentioned they'd never renewed their vows, as they'd always planned to do on their 40th anniversary. Dad joked that they'd hoped to do it somewhere romantic like Paris, but they'd settle for the local community center with punch and cake. That conversation planted the seed for what I thought would be the perfect gift. My parents had never been to Europe. Their honeymoon had been a weekend at a lake cabin because that's all they could afford. For 40 years, they'd sacrificed their dreams to secure ours. It was time to give something back. Over the next 6 months, I meticulously planned a luxury European tour. Paris for 3 nights at a 5-star hotel overlooking the Eiffel Tower. Rome for 2 nights in a renovated historical building near the Vatican. Barcelona for the final 2 nights in a beachfront resort. I booked private tours, Michelin-starred restaurants, and exclusive experiences. The itinerary balanced famous landmarks with authentic local experiences. I researched activities that would appeal specifically to my parents' interests, art galleries for mom, historical sites for dad, and cooking classes they could enjoy together. When I presented them with the trip details on their anniversary wrapped in a gold envelope with first-class plane tickets visible inside, their reaction was everything I'd hoped for. Mom cried. Dad, who rarely showed emotion, hugged me tightly, his voice cracking as he thanked me. We spent that evening looking through travel guides, watching videos of the destinations, and discussing what to pack. Jessica was conspicuously absent from this celebration, having texted last minute that she couldn't make it due to a job interview the next day. In the weeks leading up to the trip, I felt closer to my parents than I had in years. Mom called daily with questions about adapters, weather forecasts, and appropriate attire. Dad researched historical sites and created a list of places he wanted to photograph. We shopped for new luggage together, and I helped them apply for passports. Their excitement was palpable and deeply satisfying to witness. Throughout the planning process, Jessica remained on the periphery, occasionally making comments about how convenient it was that the trip fell during her unemployment, then laughing as if it were a joke. I ignored these remarks, focusing instead on finalizing details to ensure my parents would have the experience of a lifetime. Looking back, I should have recognized the warning signs. The morning of our departure arrived with perfect travel weather. Clear skies, mild temperature, minimal traffic. I'd packed my luggage the night before, double-checking documents and chargers. The car was freshly cleaned and fueled. I'd even prepared travel goodie bags with neck pillows, eye masks, compression socks, and other long-flight comforts. My excitement buzzed through me as I drove to my parents' house, imagining their faces when they saw the Paris skyline for the first time. I pulled into their familiar driveway at exactly 8:30 a.m. 2.5 hours before our flight as planned. The front curtains twitched as I approached the door, suggesting someone had been watching for my arrival. That should have been my first clue that something was amiss. When Dad opened the door, his usual warm smile was replaced with an uncomfortable grimace. He avoided eye contact, muttering a greeting while stepping aside to let me in. The living room presented a tableau that instantly set my nerves on edge. Mom sat perched on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Beside her, taking up more space than necessary, lounged Jessica, wearing an expression I recognized from childhood. It was the same look she'd had when she'd convinced our parents to let her use my concert tickets, because I probably wouldn't mind. "Good morning," I said, glancing between them. "Are the bags ready to go? We should hit the road soon to allow time for security." A heavy silence followed. Dad cleared his throat twice before speaking. "Matthew, there's been a change of plans," he said, his voice unnaturally high. "We need to talk." Mom jumped in, her words rushing out. "Your sister has been having such a difficult time lately. The job market is so competitive, and she's been under tremendous stress with interviews and rejections." Jessica nodded solemnly, though I noticed she was wearing a new designer watch I hadn't seen before. Apparently, unemployment didn't affect her shopping habits. We got to thinking. Mom continued that maybe this trip could be beneficial for her. A chance to reset and come back refreshed for her job search. I stood frozen, not fully comprehending what was happening. "What exactly are you saying?" Dad finally met my eyes. "We've decided that Jessica will come with us instead. We thought since you travel so much for business, another trip might not be as special for you as it would be for her." The room tilted slightly. I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. "The trip I planned and paid for. The trip we've been discussing for months." "We'll pay you back," Mom said quickly, though we all knew that was impossible on their retirement income, over time, of course. Jessica finally spoke, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "You're always saying I need to expand my horizons and network internationally. This could be great for my career prospects." What career? The words escaped before I could stop them. Mom's expression hardened. "That's exactly the kind of negativity she doesn't need right now. Your sister is trying to find her path." For 15 years, I asked incredulously. Some of us don't have everything handed to us on a silver platter, Jessica shot back. Dad raised his hands in a placating gesture. Let's not argue. Matthew, we know this is disappointing, but you'll have other opportunities to travel. Your sister needed some rest, so we decided to take her. We can all go together another time. That phrase, your sister needed some rest, so we decided to take her, echoed in my mind, triggering memories of countless other times Jessica's needs had trumped mine. The science fair I'd missed because Jessica had a dance recital the same night. The time my high school graduation celebration was cut short because Jessica was having friend drama that required immediate parental intervention. The Christmas my girlfriend and I had driven 8 hours through a snowstorm to visit, only to have my parents leave early to pick up Jessica from a party where she'd argued with her boyfriend. I looked at their three faces, Dad's guilt, Mom's defiance, Jessica's triumph. In that moment, I made a decision. Fighting would give Jessica the drama she craved and spoil my parents' trip before it began. Besides, the arrangements were in my name and control. I see, I said simply. When are you planning to leave? They exchanged surprised glances, clearly having expected an explosion. We thought we'd take an Uber to the airport in about an hour, Mom said. Jessica's still packing. Of course she was. She'd had approximately 12 hours to prepare for a week in Europe, while I'd been planning for 6 months. Well, don't let me keep you, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Have a great trip. You're not upset? Jessica asked, sounding almost disappointed by my calm reaction. It's your decision, I replied with a shrug. Safe travels. I walked out before they could respond, maintaining my composure until I reached my car. As I backed out of the driveway, I saw them clustered at the window watching me leave. Mom raised her hand in a hesitant wave. I didn't wave back. The drive home passed in a blur of shock and pain. My phone chirped with messages from friends who knew about the trip. Have an amazing time. Send photos. Can't wait to hear all about it. I silenced the notifications without responding. By the time I reached my empty apartment, the numbness had worn off, replaced by waves of anger and hurt that crashed over me with physical force. I stood in my living room surrounded by my perfectly packed luggage, the special travel outfit I'd chosen hanging on the closet door, the euros I'd obtained for spending money neatly organized in a travel wallet. For the first time since I was a child, I allowed myself to cry over my family's betrayal. The next few hours in my apartment were a strange limbo. I moved through the space like a ghost, touching the items I'd so carefully prepared for our trip. The Italian phrase book I'd been studying. The adapter plugs organized by country. The travel sizes of my parents' favorite toiletries I'd assembled as a surprise. Each object was a small monument to my shattered expectations. My phone rang 4 times before I finally glanced at the screen. It was the travel concierge service I'd hired to enhance our European experience. Mr. Reynolds, this is Claire from Global Concierge. I'm calling to confirm your private tour of the Louvre tomorrow afternoon. The guide wants to know if there are any specific artworks your party is most interested in seeing. The question hung in the air as a pivotal moment formed in my mind. I could cancel everything, absorb the costs, and spend the week licking my wounds. Or, the tour is still on, I heard myself say, but it will just be for one person now. I understand. We'll adjust accordingly. Will there be any other changes to your itinerary? A strange calm settled over me as clarity emerged from the emotional fog. Keep everything as planned. Just modify all reservations for 1 instead of 3. After ending the call, I sat with my decision. The trip had been designed as a gift, but perhaps it could serve a different purpose now. I didn't have to cancel my own happiness because my family had made their choice. I called my friend Taylor, needing to verbalize what had happened to make it real. They did. What? Taylor's outrage was satisfying to hear. After all the work you put into planning this, after you paid for everything. Jessica convinced them she needed it more than I did. I explained, the words tasting bitter. So what are you going to do? Please tell me you canceled all the reservations. Actually, I'm still going. A pause. By yourself. Why not? The trip is paid for. The time off is arranged. And honestly, I could use some distance from my family right now. Taylor's voice softened. You know what? Good for you. They made their choice and you're making yours. Send me pictures of you living your best life in Europe. That conversation solidified my resolve. I was going to take this trip and I was going to enjoy every minute of it. As I repacked my suitcase now with plenty of extra space, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Are you okay with the change of plans? We feel terrible about the last-minute switch, but Jessica really needed this opportunity. I stared at the message, contemplating various responses ranging from scathing to passive-aggressive. In the end, I simply wrote, "Have a safe flight." The trip to the airport felt surreal. I kept expecting to feel guilty or petty about my decision, but those emotions never materialized. Instead, I felt a growing sense of liberation. For once, I was putting myself first. The check-in process was swift without my parents' unfamiliarity with international travel to navigate. When the agent asked, "Just one traveling today?" I answered with a genuine smile, "Just one." The first-class lounge offered peaceful solitude as I sipped champagne and watched planes take off and land. My parents and Jessica would be at the airport now, probably standing in the economy check-in line. I wondered if they'd packed adapters or exchanged currency. I wondered if they'd read any of the travel guides I'd shared. I pushed these thoughts aside and focused on the adventure ahead. During the 8-hour flight, I alternated between sleeping, watching movies, and mapping out how I would adjust our original itinerary. Some activities would be less enjoyable alone, but others might actually be better. I wouldn't need to worry about my dad's limited mobility or my mom's food preferences. I could wander through neighborhoods without a schedule. I could stay out late or wake up early without disturbing anyone else. By the time we began our descent into Paris, my disappointment had transformed into anticipation. The city of light spread out below a glittering mosaic of history and beauty. I pressed my forehead against the window, like an excited child drinking in my first glimpse of the Eiffel Tower from above. The cab ride from Charles de Gaulle Airport to my hotel provided my first taste of Parisian life. The driver, noticing my interest in the passing scenery, pointed out landmarks and offered commentary in charmingly accented English. When we arrived at the 5-star hotel overlooking the Seine, the grandeur of the entrance took my breath away. "Bienvenue, Monsieur Reynolds," the receptionist greeted me. "We have your suite ready. It has one of our finest views." The suite, the one I'd booked for 3 people. When the bellhop opened the door, the spaciousness of the accommodation emphasized my solitude. A bottle of champagne waited in an ice bucket with a note congratulating my parents on their anniversary. 3 sets of luxury toiletries were arranged in the marble bathroom. The king-size bed was turned down on both sides. I tipped the bellhop generously and walked to the window. The Eiffel Tower stood majestically against the darkening sky, beginning to twinkle with lights. I'd imagined this moment so many times, always with my parents beside me witnessing their awe. Instead, I stood alone, a single silhouette against the panoramic view of Paris. I uncorked the champagne and filled a single flute. Raising it toward the twinkling tower, I made a silent toast to new beginnings. The Parisian morning greeted me with golden sunlight streaming through the partially opened curtains. For a disorienting moment, I reached for my phone to call my parents' room, then remembered the circumstances. This luxurious suite, designed for 3, contained only me. The king-size bed had remained perfectly made on one side, a visual reminder of my solitude. After a shower in the marble bathroom large enough to accommodate a small party, I dressed and headed down to the hotel's breakfast terrace. The hostess raised an eyebrow when I requested a table for 1 rather than 3, quickly consulting her reservation list. "There has been a change of plans," I explained with a practiced smile. "It will just be me this week." She seated me at a small table overlooking the Seine, where the morning light danced on the water. The breakfast spread was magnificent. Flaky croissants, artisanal cheeses, fresh fruits and eggs prepared to order. I realized I was ravenously hungry, having barely eaten the previous day. As I savored a perfectly prepared omelette, my phone chimed with messages. My parents had landed in Paris and were excited about their surprise trip. Jessica was documenting their arrival, with numerous social media posts. None of them mentioned the last-minute change of travelers. According to their narrative, this had been the plan all along. I set my phone face down, choosing to focus on the day ahead instead. The concierge had rearranged my itinerary for a solo traveler, but the first tour wouldn't begin until afternoon. I had the morning to myself. After breakfast, I wandered into the hotel lobby, studying the tourist maps near the concierge desk. A young woman with an elegant braid and intelligent eyes approached. "Are you looking for recommendations? I'm Sophie, one of the cultural liaisons for the hotel." "I'm Matthew. Actually, I had an itinerary, but it was designed for a family visit. Now I'm traveling alone and have some free time this morning." Sophie tilted her head curiously. "The family couldn't come. They chose a different traveling companion," I replied, surprised by my own candor. She nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Then we must make sure you see the real Paris, not just the tourist version. Do you mind walking?" That simple question led to one of the most memorable mornings of my life. Sophie, who turned out to be an art history student working at the hotel, part-time took me through hidden passages and quiet courtyards tourists rarely discovered. We visited a tiny bakery where the owner insisted I try his award-winning pain au chocolat. We ducked into a neighborhood bookstore with a resident cat who supervised transactions from atop a stack of literary classics. "This is the Paris I love," Sophie explained as we paused by a small fountain where local children sailed paper boats. "The monuments are magnificent, of course, but the heart of the city is in these quiet corners." I realized I was enjoying myself immensely. The weight of yesterday's betrayal hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted, becoming more manageable. When Sophie recommended a small bistro for lunch before my scheduled tour, I impulsively invited her to join me. Over cassoulet and wine, I found myself sharing the full story of how I came to be in Paris alone. Sophie listened without interruption, her expression thoughtful. "Your generosity was admirable," she said when I finished. "But perhaps this trip was always meant to be yours." "What do you mean?" "Sometimes the universe has different plans than we do. Maybe you needed this experience for yourself." Her perspective was refreshingly free of the indignation my friends back home had expressed. There was no judgment, just acceptance of circumstances and a focus on the present moment. After lunch, Sophie walked me to the Louvre, where my private guide waited. Before leaving, she scribbled her number on a napkin. "If you want more suggestions for real Parisian experiences, call me. The tour guides will show you the famous sights, but I can show you the city's soul." The Louvre tour, adjusted for a single visitor, became an intimate exploration of art history. The guide, delighted by my genuine interest, extended our time together, showing me hidden gems and sharing stories about the artists that weren't in guidebooks. Throughout the afternoon, my phone occasionally buzzed with messages from my parents. They'd arrived at their budget hotel on the outskirts of Paris, far from the luxury accommodation I'd booked. The transportation pass I'd arranged wasn't waiting at the airport as promised because I'd modified it for one person. The concierge services I'd paid for weren't recognizing their names. I responded with vague sympathy and basic tourist advice, never revealing that I was currently standing before the Mona Lisa with a private art historian explaining techniques used by Da Vinci that the average viewer might miss. That evening, exhausted but exhilarated, I returned to my hotel. The concierge handed me an envelope containing tickets for the dinner cruise I'd booked as a special surprise for my parents' first night in Paris. I considered skipping it, not wanting to be the odd single person amid romantic couples, but Sophie's words echoed in my mind. Maybe this trip was meant to be mine after all. The Seine at night was magical. The dinner cruise offered unparalleled views of illuminated monuments while serving exquisite French cuisine. I was seated at a small table near the window, perfectly positioned for photography. The couple at the neighboring table, noticing my solitude, invited me to join them. They were celebrating their 5th anniversary and found my story both amusing and inspiring. To independence, the husband toasted, raising his glass to mine. By the time I returned to my hotel, pleasantly tired and slightly wine-flushed, I'd made new friends, captured stunning photographs, and completely forgotten to check my phone for several hours. When I finally did, I found increasingly frantic messages from my mother about their difficulty navigating Paris without a guide. From my balcony watching the twinkling lights of the Eiffel Tower's hourly light show, I composed a brief message with basic navigation tips and the names of affordable tourist restaurants. I added a final line, "Enjoying your European adventure." Then I silenced my phone, opened my travel journal, and began to write about the unexpected joy of discovering Paris on my own terms. Rome greeted me with brilliant sunshine and the intoxicating chaos that defines the eternal city. After the elegance of Paris, Rome's energy was invigorating. My hotel, a renovated palazzo near the Vatican, welcomed me with prosecco and a room upgrade for the inconvenience of your changed circumstances. The travel agency had clearly communicated my situation, and the staff's sympathetic professionalism was touching. I'd been in Rome for less than 3 hours exploring the neighborhood around my hotel when my phone exploded with notifications. Calls from both parents, multiple text messages, and even an attempted video chat. I ducked into a quiet courtyard to deal with the apparent emergency. My father's voice was strained when I answered. "Matthew, we have a serious problem." In the background, I could hear my mother's tearful voice and Jessica's louder, angrier tone. "What's happening?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. "We've arrived in Paris for the next part of our trip, but the hotel has no record of our reservation. They're completely booked, and when we called the other hotels on the itinerary, they say the same thing. The tour company doesn't recognize our names either." I leaned against the sun-warmed stone wall processing this information. So they had continued with the trip itinerary, expecting all arrangements to accommodate their substitution. "That's strange," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "When did you arrive in Paris?" "About an hour ago. We're sitting in the hotel lobby trying to figure this out. Your mother is very upset." A commotion in the background, then my mother came on the line. "Matthew, nothing is working out. The hotel says our reservation was changed to just one person. The dinner cruise we were supposed to take last night wouldn't let us board because the tickets were already used. What's going on?" The moment of truth had arrived. I took a deep breath. I decided to take the trip myself. Silence then. Explosion. What you're in Europe. How could you do this without telling us?" "The same way you could decide to take Jessica instead of me without discussion," I replied calmly. "The trip was in my name. I paid for it. When you chose not to travel with me, I chose to travel alone." My mother's gasp was audible. "But we assumed you'd just cancel everything." "Why would I do that? I planned this trip for months. I had the time off work. Just because you changed your plans didn't mean I had to change mine." Jessica grabbed the phone, next her voice venomous. "You selfish jerk. You knew we were coming here. You set us up to be stranded." "I didn't invite you to Europe," I reminded her. "You invited yourself on a trip that wasn't yours. I simply didn't cancel my own vacation because of your choices." My father came back on the line, his voice a mixture of disappointment and panic. "Son, we're in a foreign country with limited funds. We can't afford these hotels at last-minute rates. What are we supposed to do now?" The guilt trip might have worked in the past, but I found myself unmoved. There are plenty of budget accommodations in Paris. I'd suggest looking outside the city center, where prices are more reasonable. But what about the tours? The experiences you planned? The transportation between cities? My mother's voice had taken on the wounded tone she used when particularly disappointed in my behavior. "Those were gifts I arranged for us to experience together," I explained. "When you decided not to travel with me, those gifts were no longer available." "So you're punishing us," Jessica spat. "No, I'm enjoying the trip I planned and paid for. Your trip is your responsibility, just as your decision to change travelers was your choice." My father sighed heavily. "Matthew, I don't think you understand the situation we're in. We budgeted based on your gift covering the accommodations and activities. We don't have the funds for an alternative luxury vacation." "I never suggested you should have a luxury vacation. I'm simply saying that the luxury vacation I planned was for us to experience together. When you chose a different traveling companion, you chose a different trip." The conversation spiraled from there. My mother cried. Jessica threatened. My father alternated between disappointment and practical concerns about their predicament. Through it all, I maintained a calm I didn't know I possessed. "Look, I finally said I need to go. I have a tour of the Vatican scheduled. There are plenty of affordable hotels in Paris. There are free walking tours. There's public transportation. Millions of budget travelers manage Paris every year. I'm sure the three of you can figure it out. After ending the call, I stood in the Roman courtyard expecting to feel guilty or vindictive. Instead, I felt oddly peaceful. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I had enforced a boundary with my family and stood firm against emotional manipulation. My Vatican tour was extraordinary. The private guide navigated us past the long queues, providing historical context and artistic insights that transformed the experience from tourist obligation to spiritual journey. Standing beneath the Sistine Chapel ceiling, I felt a profound sense of perspective about my own troubles. That evening, as I enjoyed a perfect carbonara at a restaurant recommended by my hotel's concierge, another call came from my parents. This time the tone was different. They'd found an affordable hotel and had spent the day figuring out public transportation. The real revelation, however, came when my father admitted that Jessica had assured them all the original arrangements would still be honored despite the change in travelers. She said since you'd already paid for everything, it wouldn't matter who used the reservations. He explained, embarrassment evident in his voice. She told us the hotels and tours would simply accept her in your place. And you believed that I asked, genuinely curious. It didn't sound unreasonable at the time, he admitted, but Jessica's been difficult since we realized the situation. She expected luxury and is blaming us for the disappointment. I could have said I told you so, or leveraged this moment to extract a more complete apology. Instead, I simply asked, how will you handle the rest of the trip? We're looking at budget options for Rome and Barcelona. Jessica's talking about going home early. That might be for the best, I suggested gently. After we hung up, I ordered tiramisu and reflected on the shifting family dynamics. The consequences of their choice were creating natural fractures in the alliance between my sister and parents. Without my usual role as peacekeeper and provider, they were seeing her behavior more clearly. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Hope you're happy with yourself. Mom hasn't stopped crying all day. I didn't respond. Instead, I posted a photo of my dessert with the Colosseum visible through the restaurant window to my social media with the caption, "Some experiences are best savored alone." Barcelona embraced me with Mediterranean warmth and vibrant energy. My beachfront hotel suite featured a balcony overlooking the azure water, where I spent my first morning sipping coffee and planning my day. The city's unique architecture, distinctive cuisine, and relaxed pace offered a perfect final chapter to my unexpected solo journey. While exploring Park Güell Gaudi's whimsical creation offering panoramic views of the city, I encountered Carlos, a local photographer, capturing the park's mosaics with a vintage camera. We struck up a conversation about photography techniques that evolved into an impromptu tour of his favorite vantage points throughout the park. "You have a good eye," he commented, reviewing some of my Paris and Rome photographs. "But you take many pictures of buildings and very few of people." "I'm traveling alone," I explained. "It's easier to photograph architecture." Carlos smiled. "Architecture doesn't move true, but it also doesn't tell the complete story of a place. The soul of Barcelona is in her people." That observation led to an invitation to join him the following day for a photographic exploration of Barcelona beyond the tourist zones. "Bring your camera and comfortable shoes," he instructed. "I will show you the Barcelona most visitors never see." That evening, returning to my hotel after a tapas dinner, I found several messages waiting. Jessica had indeed returned home early, citing a family emergency that required her immediate attention. My parents, now on their own, had managed to book a modestly priced hotel in Rome and were attempting to salvage their trip with free walking tours and budget restaurants. My mother's message was particularly noteworthy. "We owe you an apology, Matthew. We made a terrible mistake letting Jessica manipulate us into this change. We should have honored our original plans with you." It was the first genuine acknowledgement of their role in the situation. No qualifications, no excuses about Jessica's needs, just a straightforward admission of error. The next morning, Carlos introduced me to a Barcelona I would never have discovered on my own. We wandered through local markets where vendors greeted him by name and offered us samples of regional specialties. We visited a small cooperative gallery where emerging artists displayed works that captured Barcelona's evolving identity. We photographed elderly men playing chess in a neighborhood park and children chasing pigeons in a plaza, unmarked on tourist maps. Over lunch at a family-owned restaurant, where the menu was entirely in Catalan, Carlos asked about my journey. Most Americans traveling alone are running toward something or away from something, he observed. Which are you doing? The question struck me as profoundly insightful. Maybe both, I admitted before sharing the complete story of my family situation. Carlos listened thoughtfully, occasionally nodding. When I finished, he said, "In my culture, family is everything. But that doesn't mean accepting poor treatment. Sometimes the greatest act of love is setting boundaries." It feels selfish, I confessed. Self-respect is not selfishness, he corrected. You cannot truly give to others if you constantly deplete yourself. That afternoon, while visiting the Sagrada Familia Gaudi's unfinished masterpiece, I found myself contemplating Carlos's words amid the cathedral's soaring columns and kaleidoscopic light. The architecture illustrated how beauty emerges from structure and boundaries, how limitations can create rather than constrain. Standing in that sacred space, I reached a decision point about my parents. Their behavior had hurt me deeply, but their recent messages suggested genuine remorse. Jessica had removed herself from the equation by returning home. My parents were now struggling through a budget version of what should have been a magnificent experience. I called my friend Taylor for perspective. "They're reaching out with actual apologies," I explained. "No excuses this time." "And how do you feel about that?" Taylor asked. Cautiously optimistic. They seem to be seeing the pattern with Jessica more clearly now. "So what are you thinking?" I hesitated before voicing the idea that had been forming. "I'm considering inviting them to join me in Barcelona for the last 2 days. Seriously, after what they did. Not as a complete forgiveness or reset," I clarified. "More as a first step toward a healthier relationship, with conditions and boundaries." Taylor was silent for a moment. "You've changed on this trip, haven't you?" The observation startled me. How so? The old Matthew would have either cut them off completely or pretended nothing happened. This middle path with boundaries but openness to repair, that's new. After our call, I sat on my hotel balcony, watching the sunset paint the Mediterranean in shades of gold and pink. I thought about my childhood, about the genuine love my parents had always shown despite their enabling of Jessica. I thought about family holidays, and my father teaching me to ride a bike, and my mother nursing me through childhood illnesses. Their mistake had been painful, but was it enough to sever our relationship completely? The person I wanted to be could acknowledge hurt while still offering compassion. I made calculations about my remaining budget. The suite could accommodate all 3 of us. The final dinner reservation could be modified. There were still 2 days of experiences to share. With clarity and purpose, I composed an email to my parents. "I'm currently in Barcelona at the Hotel Marina Bay. I have a suite that can accommodate all of us comfortably for the final 2 nights of this trip. If you would like to join me, I'll arrange flights from Rome to Barcelona for tomorrow afternoon and modify the remaining reservations to include you. This isn't erasing what happened, but it is an opportunity for us to spend time together on new terms. Let me know your decision by morning." I added flight information and clear instructions before sending the message. Then I walked down to the beach, letting the gentle waves wash over my feet as the last light faded from the sky. My phone rang an hour later. It was my father, his voice thick with emotion. "We don't deserve this offer," he said simply. "This isn't about deserving," I replied. "It's about choosing what happens next." "We would be honored to join you," he said. "And Matthew, thank you for being the bigger person. I'm sorry we haven't always recognized how remarkable you are." That night, watching stars appear over the Mediterranean, I felt neither triumphant nor defeated. Instead, I experienced something more valuable, the quiet confidence of standing in my own truth while extending a hand toward reconciliation on my terms. The Barcelona airport buzzed with the usual chaos of arrivals and departures. I stood near the exit gates, a strange nervousness fluttering in my stomach as I watched for my parents. When they finally emerged, the sight was jarring. They looked smaller, somehow more vulnerable than I remembered. My mother's face lit up when she spotted me, relief washing over her features. My father carried their single shared suitcase, his shoulders slightly stooped. Our greeting was awkward, hovering between formality and familial warmth. My mother moved to hug me, then hesitated, settling for a quick embrace. My father shook my hand, then pulled me into a brief hug. "Thank you for meeting us, my mother," said her voice, carrying an unfamiliar note of deference. The flight was smooth. "The taxi is waiting," I replied, leading them outside into the brilliant Spanish sunshine. During the ride to the hotel, they marveled at glimpses of Barcelona's distinctive architecture and vibrant street life. I found myself slipping into tour guide mode, pointing out landmarks and sharing facts I'd learned during my time in the city. It was easier than addressing the elephant in the room. The real conversation began that evening over dinner at a seaside restaurant. The awkwardness of our airport meeting had gradually dissipated during an afternoon walking tour of the Gothic Quarter, but we had carefully avoided any mention of the circumstances that had brought us to this moment. As we finished our appetizers, my father set down his fork and looked directly at me. "Matthew, we owe you more than a simple apology," he began, his voice steady but emotional. "What we did was wrong on every level. We betrayed your trust and generosity in a way that can't be excused." My mother nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "We've been thinking about patterns in our family, especially how we've enabled Jessica's behavior over the years. Seeing how she reacted when things didn't go her way on this trip was illuminating." "She expected 5-star treatment without contribution," my father added. "When reality didn't match her expectations, she abandoned the trip entirely, leaving us to manage on our own." "That must have been difficult," I acknowledged, surprised by my own genuine sympathy. "It was actually necessary," my mother said thoughtfully. "We needed to see the consequences of our choices without you smoothing the way." My father reached across the table, briefly touching my hand. "You've been carrying our family for years, son. Financially and emotionally. We didn't fully recognize that until this trip forced us to stand on our own." Their sincerity was palpable without the qualifications or defenses that had characterized previous family discussions. For the first time, they were seeing the situation clearly, without Jessica's influence or their own protective instincts clouding their judgment. The following day, I shared the Barcelona I'd discovered with Carlos. We explored Gaudi's architectural wonders, my mother marveling at the organic forms and mathematical precision. We wandered through La Boqueria market, sampling local specialties and watching the vibrant interactions between vendors and regulars. We visited the beach, my father commenting that he couldn't remember the last time he'd simply sat and watched waves roll in. During a rest break at a sidewalk cafe, my mother broached the subject of Jessica. "We've enabled her dependencies," she admitted, "always stepping in to save her from consequences, always making excuses for her behavior. We thought we were being supportive parents," my father added, "but we were actually preventing her from developing resilience." "What will you do differently now?" I asked, genuinely curious about their plans. They exchanged glances before my father answered. "We've agreed to stop financial bailouts. No more covering her rent or bills when she quits jobs. No more emergency loans that never get repaid. And we're going to suggest therapy," my mother added, "for her individually and possibly for all of us together." I nodded, appreciating their intentions while maintaining healthy skepticism about lasting change. That sounds like a good start. Our final evening in Barcelona featured the special dinner I'd originally planned as the culmination of our European adventure. The restaurant, perched on a hillside overlooking the city and sea, offered a tasting menu that showcased regional specialties reinterpreted with modern techniques. As we watched the sunset paint the sky in vivid oranges and pinks, my father raised his glass. "To Matthew, who taught us more about generosity, boundaries, and forgiveness than we ever taught him." My mother added her own toast, "And to new beginnings with wiser hearts." The moment was healing but not magical. I harbored no illusions that one conversation or shared experience could completely transform decades of family dynamics. Yet I recognized genuine change in their perspective and a willingness to examine patterns that had gone unquestioned for too long. After dinner, strolling along the beachfront promenade, My parents asked about my experiences traveling alone. It was never my plan, I admitted, but it became exactly what I needed. I discovered parts of myself that might have remained hidden if I'd been focused on ensuring everyone else's enjoyment. Like what my mother asked: independence, spontaneity, the ability to connect with strangers and create meaningful moments without familiar comfort zones. I told them about Sophie in Paris and Carlos in Barcelona, about meals shared with fellow travelers, about discoveries made while wandering without agenda. "You've always been self-sufficient," my father observed, "but there's a confidence about you now that's new." The observation echoed Taylor's comment about how I'd changed during the trip. Perhaps the greatest gift of this unexpected journey had been the opportunity to see myself more clearly outside the roles I typically played in family dynamics. Our airport goodbye the next morning was genuinely emotional. They were continuing home while I had one more day in Barcelona before my return flight. "This isn't just an ending," my mother said, embracing me tightly. "It's a new beginning for all of us." My father hugged me with uncharacteristic demonstrativeness. "We're proud of the man you've become, son, even when that man rightfully holds us accountable for our mistakes." As their plane took off, carrying them back to familiar territory and the realities awaiting there, I felt a complex mixture of hope and caution. Family patterns don't change overnight, but awareness is the essential first step toward transformation. My final day in Barcelona was spent revisiting favorite discoveries and adding new ones to my collection of experiences. I sent a final message to Carlos thanking him for his insights and photography lessons. I purchased small, meaningful souvenirs rather than typical tourist trinkets. I watched the Mediterranean sunset one last time from my hotel balcony, reflecting on the journey's unexpected gifts. The flight home provided hours for contemplation. I journaled extensively, capturing insights before they could fade. The most profound realization was that self-respect isn't selfishness. By standing firm in my own worth, I had actually created the possibility for healthier family relationships rather than perpetuating damaging patterns. 2 days after returning home, I met Jessica for coffee at her request. Her initial approach was defensive, filled with justifications and subtle accusations. When these tactics didn't produce the desired effect, she shifted to tearful apologies and promises to change. I listened without argument or agreement, then gently established my boundaries. "I love you as my sister, but I need to see consistent change before I can trust you with important matters again." "What does that even mean?" she demanded. "It means I'll happily meet you for coffee or family dinners. I'll celebrate your successes and offer encouragement, but I won't provide financial bailouts or enable behaviors that ultimately harm you." "So you're abandoning me too," she accused. "Actually, I'm believing in your capacity to stand on your own feet. That's not abandonment. It's respect." Our parents have maintained their new perspective so far, though I recognize the real test will come when Jessica faces her next crisis. I've made peace with the fact that I cannot control their choices, only my responses. The European adventure that began with betrayal ultimately delivered unexpected gifts, self-discovery, new friendships, beautiful memories, and the courage to redefine family relationships on healthier terms. Sometimes the journey we resist becomes exactly the path we need. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who took your generosity for granted? What did you learn from that experience? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe to hear more tales of personal growth through challenging situations. Don't forget to share this video with someone who might need encouragement to stand in their own worth while navigating complicated family dynamics. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember that sometimes the detours in life lead to the most beautiful destinations.